The word hung in the air, sharper than the steak knives resting on the crisp white linen. Disgusting. It wasn't shouted, which almost made it worse. My daughter-in-law, Sarah, had uttered it with a kind of clinical precision, a quiet little dart of pure venom aimed directly at my heart, right across a table laden with food I couldn't possibly afford on my own pension. My grandson, Leo, the sweet, innocent reason we were all gathered in this temple of modern cuisine, looked from his mother's face to mine, his 8-year-old brow furrowed with a confusion that mirrored the ache just beginning to bloom in my chest. Instead of screaming, instead of crying, instead of doing any of the things she so clearly expected from me, I felt a strange, cold calm settle over me. I smiled, and in that moment, I decided I wouldn't just endure her cruelty, I would serve it back to her on a silver platter, paid in full. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The week leading up to Leo's 8th birthday had been a whirlwind of excitement, at least for me, 8 years old. It felt like just yesterday I was holding him for the first time in that sterile hospital room, a tiny, wrinkled creature who had somehow managed to fill a hole in my life I hadn't even known was there since my husband, David, passed. Leo was my sunshine, my direct link to the future, and the best parts of my son Mark, all rolled into one freckle-nosed package. Mark had called me on Monday, his voice full of that familiar, slightly harried energy he always had when he was trying to balance his life. "Mom, are you free on Saturday? It's Leo's birthday, and Sarah's booked a place for dinner, a celebration." "Of course I'm free, sweetheart," I'd said, my heart doing a little flutter. "Anything for my birthday boy." "Where are we going?" There was a slight pause. "It's a place called Aperture. Sarah found it on some foodie blog. It's supposed to be incredible, very culinary." I smiled into the receiver. I knew what culinary meant when Sarah was involved. It meant expensive, minimalist, and probably serving food in forms I wouldn't recognize. Sarah wasn't a bad person, not really, she was just particular. She had an image to maintain, a life she was curating as meticulously as her Instagram feed. She loved my son, and for that, I would always be grateful. But she saw me as a relic, a kindly but hopelessly outdated woman who still thought a good meal consisted of a roast chicken and potatoes. She wasn't entirely wrong, but she wore her judgment like a designer handbag, always on display. "That sounds lovely, Mark. I'm looking forward to it," I lied smoothly. What I was looking forward to was seeing Leo's face when I gave him his present. I'd spent 2 months knitting him a sweater in the colors of his favorite superhero, a complex pattern that had tested my aging eyesight, but I knew he'd love it. It was real, it was warm, and it was made with love. 3 things that felt increasingly rare in Sarah's world. Throughout the week, my anticipation grew. I bought a new blouse, something simple but elegant, that I hoped would meet Sarah's silent dress code. I got my hair trimmed and set. I wanted to look nice, not for Sarah's approval, but because this was a special occasion for Leo. He was a bright, sensitive boy, and he noticed things. He noticed when his mum would give me that tight, polite smile. He noticed when his dad would quickly change the subject if a conversation between Sarah and me grew too strained. I didn't want any strain on his birthday. I just wanted joy. When Saturday arrived, a nervous energy buzzed beneath my skin. Mark picked me up, and Leo was vibrating with excitement in the back seat, clutching a small, brightly wrapped gift from a school friend. "Grandma, did you know at Aperture they make foam out of vegetables?" he asked, his eyes wide. I chuckled. "Foam? You mean like soap bubbles?" "No, silly, it's food. Mom said it's very sophisticated." I glanced at Mark, who gave me a small, apologetic smile in the rearview mirror. "Just go with it, Mom. It's for Leo." "I know, dear. I'm just happy to be there," I said, and I meant it. The restaurant was exactly as I'd pictured it. It wasn't warm or inviting. It was an art gallery that happened to serve food. The walls were stark white, adorned with large, abstract photographs. The lighting was low and moody, the tables spaced far apart for privacy. A hostess with a severe haircut and an iPad led us to our table, a small island in a sea of hushed conversations and the faint clinking of cutlery. Sarah was already there, looking effortlessly chic in a black dress that probably cost more than my monthly utility bills. She stood to give me a perfunctory air kiss that smelled faintly of expensive perfume. "Eleanor, so glad you could make it." Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. They were scanning my new blouse, a silent, swift appraisal. I passed, apparently, because she turned her attention to Leo, showering him with affection. "Happy birthday, my sweet boy. Mommy has a big surprise for you later." We settled in, and a waiter who looked more like a scientist in a black uniform handed us menus that didn't have prices. That was the first red flag. My late husband, David, always had a saying: if you have to ask the price, you can't afford it. If they don't show you the price, they know you can't afford it. Sarah, of course, took charge of the ordering. "We'll start with the deconstructed Caesar salad and the oyster foam with sea salt air," she announced to the waiter, before turning to us. "You have to try it." The critic for the Times said it was a revelation. Mark nodded along, always eager to keep the peace. "Sounds great, honey." I just smiled and tried to look impressed. I loved a good Caesar salad, but I had a sinking feeling that deconstructed meant I'd be getting a lettuce leaf, a single crouton, and a smear of dressing on a plate the size of a hubcap. Leo, bless his heart, just wanted a burger. Sarah gently but firmly steered him toward the pan-seared Gressingham duck breast with a cherry reduction. "But I don't like duck," Leo whispered, looking at me for support. "Oh, you'll love this, sweetie," Sarah cooed. "It's not like regular duck, it's an experience." I felt a pang of sympathy for the boy. All he wanted was a simple birthday dinner, and it had turned into a culinary performance. I kept my mouth shut, though. It wasn't my place. I was a guest in Sarah's meticulously planned evening. My role was to sit, smile, and shower my grandson with love. That part, at least, was easy. I slid his gift, wrapped in colorful superhero paper that I knew Sarah would find tacky, across the table. His face lit up, all thoughts of duck foam forgotten. "For me, can I open it now?" "Of course, sweetie. It's your birthday." He tore into the paper with gusto, his little fingers making quick work of the tape. When he pulled out the sweater, his gasp was audible. "Wow, it's Captain Comet. The colors are perfect. Did you make this, Grandma?" "Every single stitch," I said, my voice thick with emotion. He immediately tried to pull it on over his button-down shirt. "Look, Mom. Look, Dad. Grandma made me the best sweater in the world." Mark beamed. "That's amazing, Mom. It looks fantastic." Sarah's smile was a little more strained. "It's very colorful, Eleanor, very thoughtful." In her language, colorful and thoughtful were polite ways of saying homemade and tacky. But I didn't care what she thought. All that mattered was the pure, unadulterated joy on Leo's face. He refused to take it off, even though the restaurant was quite warm. That sweater was my victory, a shield of love and warmth against the cool, sterile backdrop of Sarah's choosing. For a little while, everything was perfect. We were a family, celebrating a little boy. I let myself relax, sipping my overpriced water, believing foolishly that the worst of the evening, the pretentiousness, was behind us. I had no idea it was just the appetizer. The first course arrived. The oyster foam was a small, iridescent bubble on a spoon, and the deconstructed salad was, as I'd predicted, 3 separate romaine leaves artfully arranged next to a Parmesan crisp and a single lonely anchovy. I watched as Sarah took a delicate bite, her eyes closing in feigned ecstasy. Divine. "The salinity is just perfectly balanced," she declared to the table, as if we were judges on a cooking show. Mark, ever the dutiful husband, agreed enthusiastically. "Wow, honey, you were right. This is incredible." I took a bite of my lettuce. It tasted like lettuce. The foam on my spoon popped on my tongue, leaving behind a faint, fishy taste. It wasn't bad, just strange, unnecessary. I missed my roast chicken. Leo was pushing his food around his plate. "It's kind of slimy, Mom," he said, wrinkling his nose at the single, glistening oyster that had been hidden under his foam. That's the texture, honey. It's supposed to be like that. Just try it, Sarah insisted, her voice losing a bit of its syrupy sweetness. The main courses were even more elaborate. My pan-seared scallops came arranged in a perfect circle around a purple smear that the waiter described as a parsnip and violet puree. It was visually stunning, I had to admit. The plate was a work of art, but I'd grown up in a generation where food was meant to be comforting, not conceptual. Mark had the duck that had been ordered for Leo, who was now being placated with a side of pommes frites that were actually just 3 thick-cut, Jenga-stacked potato sticks. Mark chewed thoughtfully. The reduction is interesting, very tart. Sarah, who was having a filet mignon that looked surprisingly normal, turned her attention to me. Well, Eleanor, what do you think? Is it not the most exquisite thing you've ever tasted? There was a challenge in her eyes. She wasn't asking for my opinion. She was testing me. She wanted me to either lie and heap praise on it, conforming to her worldview, or admit I was too unsophisticated to appreciate it. I decided to choose a third option, gentle, harmless honesty. I had just taken a bite of the scallop with the purple puree. The scallop itself was cooked perfectly, sweet and tender, but the puree, it tasted like flowers and dirt. I swallowed and gave a small, polite smile. The scallops are cooked beautifully, I began, choosing my words carefully. Just perfect. The puree, though, it's very unusual. To be honest, it has a flavor a bit like, well, a bit like perfume. It wasn't an insult. It was an observation, a statement of fact from my palate. I'd said it quietly, without malice. I expected a little laugh. Maybe Mark would agree that it was a strange combination, but the reaction was instantaneous and glacial. Sarah put down her fork. The quiet clink of silver against ceramic was like a gunshot in the suddenly silent space around our table. Mark froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. Even Leo seemed to sense the shift in the atmosphere. What did you just say? Sarah's voice was low, devoid of all its earlier warmth. I felt a flush of confusion. I just said the puree tasted a bit like perfume. It's very floral. She stared at me, her eyes narrowed into tiny slits of contempt. And then she said it, the word that would replay in my mind for days. That's because you have an unrefined palate. You don't understand food like this. You're used to boiled meat and canned vegetables. Finding this anything but brilliant is just disgusting. Disgusting. The word landed and shattered the fragile peace. It wasn't just about the food anymore. It was about me, my taste, my background, my entire life, dismissed in one sharp, ugly word. In front of my son, in front of my grandson on his 8th birthday. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. I could feel the blood drain from my face. I looked at Mark, pleading with my eyes for him to say something, to defend me. He looked deeply uncomfortable, his gaze shifting between his wife and me. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Finally he managed a weak, "Now, Sarah, let's not. It's Leo's birthday." It was the most pathetic defense I had ever heard. It wasn't a defense of me, but an appeal to the occasion. He was trying to smooth things over, to sweep the ugliness under the rug as quickly as possible. But Sarah wasn't done. She wasn't looking at Mark. Her eyes were still locked on me, a smug little smile playing on her lips. She had won. She had exposed me as the simple, uncultured old woman she'd always believed me to be, and my own son hadn't said a word to contradict her. Leo's little voice cut through the tension. "Why did you say grandma is disgusting, Mommy? That's not a nice word." He looked on the verge of tears, his new superhero sweater suddenly looking like a ridiculous costume in this cold, hostile environment. Sarah finally broke eye contact with me and softened her expression for her son. "Mommy didn't mean it like that, sweetie. Grandma just doesn't understand fancy things. Let's just eat, okay?" But the damage was done. The air was thick with it. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me, even though no one else was paying attention. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on my shoulders. I wanted to shrink and disappear. I wanted to stand up and scream at her, to list all the sacrifices I'd made in my life. all the real, tangible things I'd created, while she was busy chasing trends and curating a life of empty aesthetics. But then, looking at Leo's crestfallen face, I knew I couldn't do that. I couldn't ruin his birthday with a shouting match. I couldn't give Sarah the satisfaction of a fight. A fight would mean she had gotten to me. A fight would mean we were equals in this ugliness, and we were not. So I did something else. A new feeling, cold and clear as ice, pushed the hurt aside. It was resolve. I picked up my fork, took another bite of the scallop with the perfumed puree, and I smiled. A genuine, serene smile. "You know, you might be right, Sarah," I said, my voice even and calm. "It must be an acquired taste." Her triumphant smirk faltered. This wasn't the reaction she'd wanted. She had expected tears or anger. My calm acceptance confused her. It took her weapon away. For the rest of the meal, I played the part of the gracious, slightly clueless mother-in-law. I asked Leo about school. I talked to Mark about his work. I didn't address Sarah directly again, but I included her in my gaze, never letting her see a single crack in my composure. And all the while, a plan was forming in my mind, a quiet, simple act that would say everything I couldn't say out loud. "Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below." The rest of the dinner was a masterclass in tension. Sarah tried to reclaim control, talking loudly about a planned trip to Aspen and the new art installation she'd seen, but her words felt hollow. My silence was louder. It was a refusal to engage on her level, a quiet defiance that seemed to unsettle her more than any outburst would have. Mark just ate his food, his face a mask of strained neutrality. He was a man trapped between two worlds, and on that night he had chosen the path of least resistance, which unfortunately meant leaving me to fend for myself. I excused myself from the table, saying I needed to use the restroom. My legs felt a little unsteady as I walked away, the adrenaline from the confrontation beginning to fade, leaving a deep, resonant ache behind. I didn't go to the restroom. Instead, I found our waiter standing near the service station. I beckoned him over with a discreet wave. He approached, his expression impassive. "Is everything all right, madam?" he asked. "Everything is wonderful," I said, my voice smooth as silk. "I'd like to take care of the check for my table now, if you don't mind, and I'd prefer to do it quietly. It's my grandson's birthday, and I'd like it to be my treat." The waiter's professional mask slipped for just a second, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He'd seen the table. He knew what a bill like this would look like. He glanced over at my family, then back at me. "Of course, madam, right this way." He led me to the hostess stand near the entrance, where the light was slightly better. He printed the bill and presented it to me discreetly in a black leather folder. I opened it. My breath caught for a second. With the wine Sarah had ordered, the multiple courses, and the mandatory gratuity for a larger party, the total came to $384.50. It was a staggering amount of money for me. It was more than my grocery budget for 2 months. It was a significant portion of the savings I carefully guarded for emergencies. For a fleeting moment, I hesitated. Was this petty? Was it a foolish, expensive gesture? Then I thought of Sarah's face, the smug contempt in her eyes, as she'd called me disgusting. I thought of the way my own son had looked away, unable to meet my gaze. This wasn't about being petty. This was about reclaiming my dignity. Sarah operated in a world where value was measured in dollars and exclusivity. Fine, I would speak her language. I would use her own metric of power against her. She had tried to make me feel small and poor and worthless. I would show her that my generosity, my class, was bigger than her insult. I took out my well-worn credit card, the one I used only for major purchases, and handed it to the waiter. "Please, and don't mention this to the table until after we've left," I instructed. "Just tell them it's been taken care of." "As you wish, madam," he said, his tone now holding a new note of respect. When I returned to the table, dessert was being served. A single slice of chocolate lava cake with a candle in it had been placed in front of Leo. We all sang "Happy Birthday," my voice joining in, clear and steady. The harmony was broken, but I would not let the melody die. Leo blew out his candle with a mighty puff, and we all clapped. For that one moment, watching the pure joy on his face, the ugliness almost disappeared. But it was still there, lurking beneath the surface. After the cake, Sarah signaled for the check. It was the moment I had been waiting for. The waiter approached the table, but he didn't have a bill in his hand. He directed his words to Sarah, but his eyes flickered toward me for a fraction of a second. "There's no need, madam, the bill has been taken care of." Sarah's perfectly plucked eyebrows shot up. "Taken care of? By whom? Did you make a mistake?" She looked at Mark, a question in her eyes. Mark just looked confused. "It was taken care of by the lady," the waiter said, giving a slight, almost imperceptible nod in my direction before turning and walking away. The silence that fell was entirely different from the one that had followed her insult. That one had been heavy with shock and shame. This one was crystalline with disbelief. Sarah turned and stared at me. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The look on her face was a priceless cocktail of confusion, embarrassment, and dawning humiliation. She, who prided herself on being the provider of this grand experience, the one in control, had just been upstaged, and not by a rival in her social circle, but by me. The simple, old-fashioned mother-in-law, who she thought couldn't tell the difference between fine dining and a TV dinner. I didn't say a word. I just gathered my purse, stood up, and smoothed down my blouse. "Well, that was a lovely evening," I said to the table at large. I walked over to Leo and kissed the top of his head, right on his superhero sweater. "Happy birthday, my sweet boy. Grandma loves you very much." Then I turned to Mark and Sarah. I met my son's gaze, which was now filled with a dawning, horrified understanding. Then I looked at Sarah. Her face was pale, the smugness was gone, replaced by a raw, naked shock. "Thank you for the invitation, Sarah. It was very memorable," I said, my voice gentle. I gave them both a small, serene smile. "Have a wonderful night," and with that, I turned and walked out of the restaurant. I didn't look back. I could feel their eyes on me, but I walked with my head held high, the click of my sensible heels on the polished concrete floor sounding like a drumbeat of victory. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I felt a sense of release so profound it was almost dizzying. I hadn't raised my voice, I hadn't shed a tear in front of them, I hadn't sunk to her level, I had simply paid the bill. And in doing so, I had left her speechless, holding nothing but the check for her own cruelty. The drive home with Mark was usually a comfortable silence, punctuated by his complaints about traffic or my questions about his week. That night, the silence was a living thing, a heavy blanket of unspoken words. I had insisted on taking a taxi, wanting my own space, but Mark wouldn't hear of it. So there we sat, him driving, me in the passenger seat, the city lights blurring past the window. I expected an apology, or an excuse, or an argument. I got none of them. He just drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. I knew what was happening in his head. He was replaying the scene, rehearing Sarah's insult and his own inadequate response. He was wrestling with his loyalty to his wife and his duty to his mother. The bill, my final act, had forced an issue he'd been avoiding for years. When he pulled up to my small, neat house, he finally turned off the engine and looked at me. His face was etched with a misery that pained me to see. "Mom, about tonight," he started, his voice cracking. I didn't want to make it harder for him. I put my hand on his arm. "Mark, it's all right." "No, it's not all right," he said, his voice low and full of self-reproach. What Sarah said was, "It was unacceptable," and I just sat there. I didn't defend you, and then you paid for all of it. Why would you do that, Mom, after she treated you that way? I looked at my son, the boy I had raised to be a good man, and I saw the conflict tearing him apart. I did it because I wasn't going to let her have the last word. I said calmly. Her words were meant to hurt and diminish me. If I had yelled, I would have just been proving her right in her own mind that I'm unsophisticated and can't handle myself. If I had cried, she would have savored it. So I did the one thing she couldn't understand. I responded to her ugliness with grace. It wasn't a gift to her, Mark. It was a gift to myself. It was me reminding myself who I am. He shook his head, looking down at his hands. She was so angry in the car, not yelling angry, but quiet angry. The worst kind. She kept asking me why you would do it, what point you were trying to make. She thinks you were trying to humiliate her by showing off. I let out a small, sad laugh. Showing off? With my pension? Oh, sweetheart, that meal will be beans on toast for me for the next month. She doesn't understand because she thinks everything is about money and power. She can't comprehend an act that is simply about dignity. He was silent for a long moment. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry I didn't stand up for you. I know, I said softly, but you need to figure out how you're going to handle this, Mark. Not for me, but for yourself, and for Leo. He saw everything tonight. He heard what his mother said, and he saw that his father said nothing. Children are smart. They know when something is wrong. That hit him harder than anything else I could have said. The thought of his own son seeing him as weak was his greatest fear. He drove away, looking like he had the weight of the world on his shoulders, and in a way, he did. The next few days were quiet. I didn't hear from them, and I didn't reach out. I gave them space. I spent time in my garden, I read my books, and I worked on a new knitting project. The sting of Sarah's insult began to fade, replaced by a quiet satisfaction in how I'd handled it. The dent in my savings account was painful, but every time I thought of the look on her face, I considered it money well spent. A week later, on a Saturday afternoon, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door to find Mark and Leo standing on my porch. Mark looked tired but resolved. Leo was holding a small bouquet of daisies, his face solemn. "Can we come in, Mom?" Mark asked. I ushered them into the living room. Leo walked straight up to me and handed me the flowers. "These are for you, Grandma. I'm sorry Mommy was mean to you." My heart melted. I knelt and hugged him tightly, breathing in the scent of his hair. "Oh, my sweet boy, it's not your fault. Thank you for the beautiful flowers." Over Leo's head, I looked at Mark. He gave me a weak smile. He had talked to his son. That was a start. While Leo went to the kitchen to get a vase for his daisies, Mark sat down on the sofa. "Sarah and I have been talking," he said. "A lot. It hasn't been easy." She finally admitted that what she said was horrible. "I don't think she fully understands why it was so horrible to you, but she knows it crossed a line." "And what about you, Mark?" I asked gently. "I told her that it can never happen again," he said, his voice firm in a way I hadn't heard in a long time. "I told her that you are my mother, and I will not sit by and watch her disrespect you, that our family has to be a place of kindness, especially for Leo to see, or it's not a family I want." The words were a balm to my wounded heart. It was everything I had needed to hear from him that night at the restaurant. "She wants to apologize," he continued, "but I told her she's not ready. An apology without understanding is just words. She needs to think about why she felt the need to be so cruel in the first place." He sighed. "I think the bill is what did it. It confused her so much, she was actually forced to be introspective for the first time in years. She couldn't categorize your response, so she had to actually think about it." I just nodded, accepting his words. There would be no dramatic, tearful apology from Sarah, and I didn't need one. The change wasn't about her asking for my forgiveness. It was about my son finding his spine and setting boundaries for his own family. My quiet act had given him the space and the impetus to do that. From that day on, things began to shift, slowly but surely. Family dinners became simpler affairs, sometimes even at my house, where I'd make my disgusting roast chicken and Leo would devour it. Sarah was still Sarah, cool, reserved and obsessed with appearances, but the sharp edge of her condescension was gone. She was more careful around me, more watchful. My quiet act at the restaurant had shown her that I wasn't the weak, simple woman she could easily dismiss. I had my own kind of power, one that didn't need to be loud or flashy. It was the quiet, unshakable power of dignity. And that, I knew, was something no amount of money could ever buy. A few weeks later, I took Leo out, just the two of us, for a birthday do-over. We didn't go anywhere fancy. We went to a local burger joint with sticky tables and a loud jukebox. He ordered a giant cheeseburger with extra pickles, and I had a vanilla milkshake. He wore his Captain Comet sweater, even though it was a little too warm for it. And as he told me a long rambling story about a video game, his face lit up with ketchup and joy. I knew I had won the only victory that ever truly mattered. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen two other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.